Hi, and welcome to another Tending the Garden program. This time we are going to be talking about landscaping, yards. It's usually the first thing that people think of when they think about the environment or environmental stewardship or maybe living a little bit more sustainably. Often the first conversation that people have is about what they're doing with their yards. There's a lot in the news about our situation with our pollinators declining, what that means for our food system, that kind of thing. And then also water usage is a really huge issue, especially in Oklahoma. So this is kind of one of our preliminary programs is going to be about yards and landscaping and some ways that we can be a little bit lighter in our impact on two levels. In your personal home, we'll have a conversation about that, what you can do in your own household, what you can do with your own, if you rent, if you own your own home, if you have a farm or a local homestead. This presentation will be a little bit more geared towards faith communities that maybe have property, they have a building, they have maybe some land around their building as a public space. How can they utilize that land in a way that is a little more sustainable or even supporting wildlife, using a little bit less water, stuff like that. And then I think we'll get a little bit into as well, is there even maybe area for ministry or serving your community through like a community garden, using that land a little bit more effectively, and in a way that has a little bit less impact. So we are thrilled to have Marcus Long with the Yard by Yard program. I've been seeing Yard by Yard, the signs around town for quite a while. Marcus, when did Yard by Yard get started, and why did it get started, and who's kind of leading this movement?
Yeah, so the Yard by Yard program conveniently got started in 2020. So right as COVID was gearing up, so was our program. And so it kind of got off to a slow start, but really it kind of hit its full stride in 2022, where we really saw a lot of growth annually. And to your question of why did the Yard by Yard program start, just to provide some context, the Conservation Commission, it started shortly after the Dust Bowl. The Conservation Commission formed, or the NRCS formed, and then which is the federal level. And then subsequently, the Conservation Commission, which is the state level, formed because we were kind of, as a country, as a group of farmers and land managers, everybody was like, man, we just created a massive natural disaster, the Dust Bowl. And it's like, how are we going to prevent that from happening ever again? And so scientists and conservationists, kind of like myself, were hired to give technical assistance to farmers to help them treat their land responsibly. Still get crops, still use that land for human needs, but do it in a way that doesn't create a dust bowl. Hopefully, it doesn't create water quality issues, doesn't have as big of an impact on wildlife, things along those lines. More recently, jump forward nearly 100 years. The Conservation Commission kind of had this realization that urban communities kind of aren't really connected with the Conservation Commission. They may not even really be familiar with conservation. I think a lot of times urban communities, they have a different set of language, where urban communities might say sustainable, rural communities say conservation. So it's kind of trying to bring those worlds together. A farmer maybe has 1,000 acres. There's a lot you can do on 1,000 acres, but if you own 1 acre, half an acre, a quarter acre, there's still things you can do to impact your community. And the title Yard by Yard comes from that idea. It's 1 yard at a time. 1 yard, that's not very much, but if it's a bunch of yards, kind of all incorporating these conservation practices, like encouraging soil health through compost, or planting a pollinator garden, or growing your own food. If everybody kind of joins in, we can all kind of come together and be a pretty big landmass, just with individual homeowners.
I love that. And I love that as a bigger concept as well when it comes to, looking at our climate impacted world. I get into arguments with people who feel like there's no a room for or need really for like a personal changes or community changes, that it needs to be like on a corporate level or just our economy or something like that. It's like a much larger issue, but you can't negate the impact. Like if I'm so why do I need to do this with my yard? But I love the idea even visually of the concept that you're talking about here, where okay, yes, this is only 1 yard, or I'm only one person who's trying to conserve water, but that might not make very much difference. But if so many more people were doing that as well, like what is the communal impact of that? And then I think that really lends itself well to like faith communities, because there's so much power in so many different areas in terms of service to your community, service to your neighbors, service to the earth, being good stewards, and that communal power, working together collectively to make an impact. So I just love that concept.
Yep, that's exactly right. Oklahoma is about 98% private land. We're one of the most, I'm going to say probably the most private land. And that was by nature of that, the government trying to get it to be settled. Nobody took the time to really carve out natural spaces to be preserved. It kind of all just got grabbed up as farmland. And has since stayed that way for the most part. So that does create some pretty big challenges. It creates a really, really high level of segmentation, land segmentation, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And then it also means that a lot of different people are responsible for conservation in Oklahoma, whereas a state like Wyoming, I brought up Wyoming earlier. I don't know what their amount of private land is. I'm going to guess it's under 50%. I'm guessing, but states like Wyoming and Nevada have a ton of public land. They're probably not even 50% private land, and it gets a lot easier. The decision making gets a lot easier. They take, national park land or Forest Service land, and a much smaller group of people make the decisions on how to conserve or preserve those land areas. In Oklahoma, we don't have that luxury, so we all got to we got to band together, and that's why education is so important here in Oklahoma, because of that exact thing I just brought up. We need a lot of people to kind of have a vague idea of the ecology of our area in order to make smart decisions about how to manage that land.
Awesome.
So, kind of like we started out with talking about, my name is Marcus Long. I work for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission, which is a branch of the state level USDA. So that's an easy way to think about the Conservation Commission. We're kind of a cousin to the USDA. So by definition, urban is non-agricultural, and that's why as we move through this, I'll kind of talk about and reference urban agriculture, and that's kind of an oxymoron. Those two things really, from a purely linguistics point of view, those two things really don't mix, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about urban. So I put these two pictures up in these slides because I think when I imagine urban, before I took this job and started thinking about it a little bit harder, I probably would imagine the picture on the left. That's like New York City or San Francisco or something. It's a big city. That's probably what I would have thought of. But really, when we talk about urban, we're talking about small towns. The town that I grew up in, I grew up right outside of Ardmore. There's a little bit of agriculture out there, but most of the industry is oil. It's about 2,000 people, but it still shares a lot of the problems that even Oklahoma City has. It shares those problems just on a smaller extent. It has roads that segment ecological processes and create challenges in water quality. It segments wildlife habitat. It separates people from fresh, nutrient-rich food, even in a small town. And so, yeah, I would encourage you, as we're talking about urban conservation, and as that brand builds and maybe becomes a bit of a buzzword, I would encourage everybody to think about urban a little bit differently, and think about urban by the problems that it creates, and that really is the segmentation of wildlife habitat, and the breakdown of ecological processes. And so when we build urban areas, it now no longer really has an ecological function, but before it did. So urban areas are always wildlife habitat or farmland. And I bring that up to say that land is meant to have a function. All land should have a function. And when we think about land management, we kind of need to put it in that frame. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about development. And so when I was trying to define development, I kind of came up with the idea that roads were the easiest way to define development, because they're kind of the first stage of development is installing roads. And so this map is kind of showing all the roads in the lower 48. And so basically, just to summarize, the green areas, they're kind of 5 to 20 miles away from a road. The blue areas are under a mile away from a road. And then the yellow areas are you're on a road. That's pretty much is a road. So we can see our urban centers are all yellow, right? We got LA down here. That's probably Phoenix, Albuquerque, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Dallas down here. Those are our urban centers, right? And so we can see, zooming in a little bit further, we see that Oklahoma, although I think a lot of times Oklahoma thinks of itself as a rural state, and we are, we're a rural state. I think even Oklahoma City, it's a lot like a big small town, but we're a little more developed than we might think at first glance. Just about all of Oklahoma is a mile away from a road. You really can't. You'll never get too far off the beaten path in Oklahoma. We're pretty well built out with roads. This is the first step towards urbanization, like I mentioned earlier. And then these roads, they're kind of the first step to dividing habitat, disrupting ecological processes. Okay, so what should our goal be with urban conservation? Urban conservation looks for compromises to account for the loss of farmland, wildlife habitat, and places where people live. And yeah, so that's conservation. That could be the definition just for conservation. But this kind of puts it in that urban lens where we're looking for compromises. We want some green infrastructure. Even just what you can do on your own property does make an impact. Okay, so why bother? So yeah, I would throw this at my audience member here, Kat. Why should we bother with urban conservation? Just give me your reasons for why that's important.
Well, I remember years ago, the very first podcast I ever listened to was the Stuff You Should Know about grass. And I don't think I'd really ever thought about why do most places that we visit, that we inhabit, all just have grass, like Bermuda grass or whatever depending on what area you're in. It's just sort of a given. And it really helped break down. They kind of talk about like when that started. It was like a magazine article that was all based on like British landscaping, kind of developed the ideal for what people's yards, like their dream, when they're the sort of American dream, I'm going to own this home and I'm going to have this land. What is that going to look like? Like that sort of shaped what that should look like. And today, I feel like we just think that's the idea of what it's supposed to look like, but that it's completely, it's just not functional. It's not supporting life. It's not supporting a healthy ecology that supports like food or things that we need. And then, obviously that water is a huge issue. It's taking up a lot of water. That we really need to be thinking about in Oklahoma in terms of long-term sustainability with water. So those are my
Yeah,
how
I
it
think
inspired me to do that with my get rid of all the lawn and the grass in the yards that I've had access to.
yeah, no, and I think that really gets to the heart of urban conservation is that, yeah, that's what this presentation is all about. It's functional land and Bermuda grass, it's from Africa. It's native to Africa. Contrary to what you might think, if I didn't know that, I would think it was native to Bermuda, but it's not. It's actually native to Africa. It's invasive in Bermuda. So it's an interesting grass that way. And yeah, it doesn't really have a function here. Cows can eat it. That maybe is its function, but for the most part, wildlife doesn't really interact with it. And to your point about water, landscape water on the landscape is the number one water use, nationwide. And, so it's also the number one water use per house. So yeah, you're spending the most money on water to water your lawn for your average person. And it also, just one more comment on Bermuda lawns. It's a good thing to know when we talk about healthy soil. Healthy soil is all about the interaction between plants and soil. That's what makes healthy soil, and that's what makes healthy plants. So you can kind of decipher if one's healthy by the appearance of the other. But Bermuda grass, it's short. It really doesn't root very deep unless you let it grow tall, but most people don't. So if you cut it short, its roots kind of get stunted, and its roots don't go very deep. And so it doesn't have very much organic matter in the soil. That organic matter would soak up water, it would prevent runoff. It would mitigate drought. But because we've covered so much area with Bermuda grass and concrete, that really doesn't happen. And then so water doesn't soak in, so it has to go somewhere. It runs off the top. This creates increased flooding. This creates erosion. We blow out our creeks in urban areas. That's probably one of the number one calls I get is somebody's calling me and letting me know that their creek is eroding really severely. And that's because water isn't able to soak into the soil. So we have increased flooding, which causes, at times, some pretty significant erosion. All right. So yeah, that's a great reason. Here's my reasons for why I think urban conservation is important. There's certainly the reasons go beyond what Kat mentioned and the reasons I have up here, but these are kind of what I had it boiled down to. So urban areas they are converted farmland, right? They're not typically converted farmland or wildlife habitat. They are converted farmland or wildlife habitat, and we got to find a way to coexist with wildlife and also with agriculture. If all of our agriculture is coming from California, it has a necessity now to have more preservatives in it. It has a necessity to be more genetically modified to last longer. It needs to be frozen in order to get to us. And all the while it loses nutritional value. And that's where most of our produce comes from California. The Central Valley of California grows a good portion of the food, but definitely the produce like tomatoes, lettuce, watermelons, all those kinds of things. They typically come from California. And on average, when a bag of lettuce hits the shelf in Target, it's already a month or two old. It's already it's on the back end of its life by the time it makes it to the shelf, and it's lost a lot of nutritional value. So preserving wildlife in urban areas is really important, but also creating opportunities for people to access fresh foods is a crucial part of my work and my day-to-day job, and that's human health. That's an issue of human health that we talk about pretty frequently in my day-to-day work. Okay, so the next one here, natural ecosystems are too small and fragmented to be self-sustaining. And so I've kind of referenced ecological processes kind of throughout this presentation. And I want to take this as an opportunity to kind of mention what I'm talking about. So when I say ecological processes, I'm talking about the water cycle. That's an ecological cycle. That's kind of what we were talking about a minute ago, where water in a native ecosystem, more of it will be stored in the ground. But because of urban areas and how they're designed, it doesn't get stored in the ground. It makes its way into our rivers and creeks and ponds, and we move it away from us because maybe to avoid disturbance. And that's a disruption of an ecological process. Now when drought rolls around, the water is not in the ground and available for plants. So plants are less drought resistant because we've moved water away. And when we disrupt these ecological processes, soil no longer has a way to rebuild itself. So we got to find replacements. And I'll talk about that a little bit down the road. We have to find replacements for those ecological processes in our own land management, even on a small scale. Okay, then the next point here is the impacts of human lifestyles expand far beyond simply where we live. So it's easy enough to understand that if I were to release something into the atmosphere, into the air, it would spread everywhere, right? And that's a way that our lifestyles can impact the whole earth. And that's also true with water. We call all the air around the earth, we call that the atmosphere, right? All the water that's on earth, we call that the hydrosphere. And all the water on earth, it's all connected. We here in Oklahoma, I think it can be hard to conceptualize that because we're a landlocked state, but all the water in Oklahoma is in the Mississippi River watershed. So over time, it may take a very long time, but all of our water eventually goes down to the Mississippi. And where does the Mississippi go? Kat,
The Gulf of Mexico?
The Gulf of Mexico, that's it. Yeah, so from all of our water eventually makes it to the Gulf of Mexico over time. It may take a really long time. And this is why you see, if you guys have ever heard of the Gulf of Mexico dead spot, that's from fertilizer. That's from fertilizer runoff in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, making its way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So yeah, those are some ways that our lifestyles impact really the whole earth. Next point here is urban conservation practices are not only better and more functional than traditional alternatives, but they're cheaper and easier to maintain. So I always like to bring up the economic value of urban conservation. It really is, even if you're, not a gardener, there's always a spectrum of interest in gardening or land management. It can still affect your pocketbook, and not just your personal water use, but also your city's water use, right? The biggest individual water use per home is landscape water. And that's also true for municipalities. So your taxpayer dollars go to the use of irrigation systems. Your taxpayer dollars also go to cleaning your water. I live in Oklahoma City. My drinking water comes from Lake Hefner. There's a big water treatment facility right next to Lake Hefner. And my taxpayer dollars as a resident go to funding that water treatment facility, which is important. But if cleaner water is going into Lake Hefner, it's much cheaper for the water quality or the water treatment facility to get that water to me. And so, we want to do urban conservation to have cleaner water, to use less water. These all have economic benefits.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, especially for faith communities, because faith communities are really looking to save some money. So anywhere where you can kind of cut some costs, I think is a huge added benefit.
Sure.
Not an incentive.
Yeah. No doubt. And then the last one here, this kind of goes with a different PowerPoint that I have, but I like to leave it in there because it's an important thing to consider as a voter. Urban centers have the most voting power. So I always try to encourage, as a voter, consider conservation, consider the needs of farmers. They're the ones who are feeding all of us. And just if you live in an urban area, all the more reason to put that voting power to use. And then if you don't live in an urban area, all the more reason to support urban conservation. We need urban people and rural people to kind of be on the same page about conservation values. That is a crucial part of all this. All right, so what's urban conservation giving you? We talked a little bit about this. Landscapes are more drought resistant, really on a small scale, like what's pictured here, but also on a large scale, like the 1,000-acre wheat farm. If we're incorporating conservation practices, we become a lot more drought resistant. We mitigate flood. If water's able to soak into the soil, then we don't have as much flooding. And then we save costs. Native plants, they really don't need much fertilizer. They don't need as much water. So you save a little cost on some of the inputs that are associated with Bermuda grass, which just to shout Bermuda grass out one more time, because it's unnatural, it doesn't belong here. It's a monoculture. Monocultures are unnatural. It requires a lot of inputs to keep it happy. It's not in a functional, healthy soil system. So we have to constantly feed it. So that way it'll stay green and stay alive and look how we want it to look. And so there's a lot of inputs associated with Bermuda grass. And also because monocultures are unnatural, there's always something else trying to grow in Bermuda lawns, right? And I always like, yeah, I mean, it never ends. You'll never get rid of all the weeds in a Bermuda lawn. You'll always have to apply pesticides. And I always like to say that, I'm an ecological background, but for a physicist, a physicist has gravity, and that's like the core tenet of physics. They have to base everything around gravity. People with ecological backgrounds like myself, it's biodiversity. Nature is always working towards biodiversity. And when we think about ecology and natural systems, we always have to factor in biodiversity kind of as our core tenet. Okay, so what does urban conservation look like? Especially, on a small scale. I've kind of talked broadly about conservation in general, and I've referenced big farms. So what does this look like for the average homeowner? So I think I just kind of boiled it down to the easiest things that everybody can do. So plant native plants. Native plants they're the opposite of Bermuda grass. Where Bermuda grass and other ornamental plants, they don't necessarily have a function. They're not really doing anything for the ecosystem. They may as well be a statue, and whereas a native plant has a function. It serves a purpose. It's a food source for migrating birds or pollinators. They're deeper rooting, so they create, we talked about how roots create healthy soil. So oftentimes soil with native plants in it is much healthier and infiltrates better. And that's something everybody can do. I think there's a spectrum of levels of interest. And some people, you might want to tear up your whole lawn and completely bomb it with native plants. And I think that's awesome. That's beautiful to me. But maybe that's not your style. And you just want to have garden beds. There's nothing wrong with that. Plant native plants in your garden beds instead of some of the ornamental alternatives. A lot of our ornamental plants, they're from Asia or they're from Europe. But yeah, I would encourage you to look into native alternatives to those. And then encourage healthy soil. So, healthy soil is core to really all conservation, all preservation, any wildlife or land management. You got to consider the soil. And we talked about building in substitutes for the natural carbon cycles that would have happened in the Great Plains, like bison herds and fire. And really the easiest way to do that is apply compost. Compost is organic matter, right? Organic matter is carbon. So when we take compost and we apply that to the soil, that stimulates our soil microbiology, which then helps feed our plants diverse nutrients. Okay, Kat, I got another question for you. How many nutrients does a plant need?
Oh, I just learned this at the compost workshop I just went to. I think she said it was like 60 or 90 or something.
A little less than that, but there is a lot of debate. I will say there is a wide range of what people say that plants need. What I say is 18. There's 9 macronutrients, 9 micronutrients. And how many are written on a bag of fertilizer? Do you know?
3.
3. That's right. You're exactly right. So we take, something that needs 18 different nutrients and we give it 3. But when you apply compost and raise the level of carbon in your soil, this creates a greater access to nutrients. It'll give your plants a little bit of nutrients, but more than anything, what it's doing is it's creating more accessible nutrients. And if when I was in high school, I was a big basketball player. Loved basketball. I wanted to be a big buff guy. I grew up watching LeBron James, so I was like, I want to be LeBron James. And so I would eat peanut butter and eggs, and that's all I ate. I just only protein. And that's kind of what we're doing. And that's not really healthy, though, right? I wasn't getting the vitamins that I needed, the fiber that I needed, that comes with a diverse diet that makes a healthy person. And that's kind of what we do with plants. We give them nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium that's in a normal bag of fertilizer. That's just steak and milk, and we just say, hey, get out there, do your best, be a healthy plant. But we're not giving them everything they need, and when we give them compost and when we encourage healthy soil, we give them what they need. We give them access to the diverse nutrients that they need. All right. Okay. And I wanted to do some plant recommendations. I talked about plant natives, find native alternatives to ornamentals. What the heck am I talking about? So I made a little not this, but that kind of plant recommendations. So over here on the left, this is Nandina. This is a super common landscaping plant. It is all over town. Anybody watching this has probably seen this before. But Nandina, it doesn't serve an ecological function. Golden currant, which is a native plant with a beautiful yellow flower, it does serve an ecological function. So yeah, plant but they have a similar look and size. Plant golden currant. Don't plant pampas grass. Pampas grass can be a pretty nasty invasive. You can plant switchgrass instead as an alternative. Instead of lilies, you can plant butterfly milkweed. Butterfly milkweed is you got anybody watching this has probably seen butterfly milkweed. It's getting pretty popular, but it stays small. It has a beautiful orange flower. It gets lots of pollinator visitors. Okay, and then don't plant Bradford pears. Hopefully everybody's on the same page about Bradford pears. But here's an alternative. You can plant red buds. They're similar in size. Red bud's a little bit smaller. They bloom around the same time. And if you don't like red buds and you really like those white flowers, there's native trees with those white flowers too. We have serviceberry and native plum trees that look very much like the Bradford pear without some of the ecological costs associated with Bradford pear. Yeah, so and instead of mums, you can plant, this is aromatic aster. This is one of my personal favorites. They have a similar shape as mums. They get a little bit bigger, but they flower around the same time, and really they look very, very similar. Okay, and then you can plant for pollinators, just a different lens to look through when kind of designing your garden. You can plant passion vine. That'll attract Gulf fritillaries. It also, it does produce passion fruit. So native, who knew, passion fruit, native to here in Oklahoma. It's also just like, this is one of my favorite flowers. This thing looks like it came straight from the Amazon,
Yeah.
It's just very alien looking. But anyway, and then you can plant golden Alexanders for black swallowtail. So golden Alexander, it's related to parsley. It looks kind of like parsley, but it has a very attractive yellow flower, and it's self-seeding. So it's kind of good for a bigger garden that you just want something to grow everywhere and fill it in. Plant some golden Alexander, and then you can plant frog fruit for the common buckeye. Frog fruit, it's kind of a ground cover. It's very much grass-like. I've seen it used as ground covers in different gardens. And who doesn't like the common buckeye? That's one of my favorite pollinators. Okay, then you can plant for birds. If you're more of a bird person, you can plant things like inland sea oats. for grain eating birds like juncos and sparrows and doves. And really, I think any native grass will kind of fit the bill here. Things like big blue stem and switchgrass will also attract birds that eat seeds. You can plant foxglove, any flower that's kind of a cone shaped flower. It'll attract hummingbirds. I think we have 3 hummingbirds that migrate through Oklahoma. So foxglove is a great plant to attract them. And then purple coneflower, this is one of the darlings of native plant landscaping. You just see this one everywhere, but for good reason. It's very, very beautiful, and it's really easy to grow. And it'll attract kind of the same birds that eat sunflower seeds will be attracted to this flower. So chickadees, blue jays, cardinals, finches. Okay, and then some, for people maybe working in smaller spaces, or maybe if your church or religious area does more with pots rather than with gardens. I always like to give some pot design tips. This is a little catchphrase that an old boss told me that stuck with me over the years. And he would always say, thrillers, fillers, spillers. So thrillers, that's your tall, spiky thing in the middle of your pot. So some native alternatives for that is pink muleygrass, prickly pear. I always love cactus in pots. So you can buy spineless varieties of prickly pear. And they're so easy to grow. They are so easy to grow. And then swamp mallow, hibiscus. Who knew we had a native hibiscus here in Oklahoma? Anyway, then fillers. These are the things that are kind of filling out around your spike shape. So this would be, things like butterfly milkweed that I mentioned earlier, that little orange flower, lemon balm, if you want something more green, or lamb's ear, which is it's a little prairie plant that actually does really well in a pot. And then your spiller. These are the things coming over the side, kind of like this. This looks like some honeysuckle or something in this particular pot, coming over the side. So prairie wine cups, snail seed, creeping phlox. I love creeping phlox. It is just really bright pink flowers in the early spring. It is beautiful. All right. Then some other tips. I'll go over these pretty quick. So just, make sure that you're grouping plants by water and sun needs. That's the best way to design a garden. Is I need to look at how wet does this area get when it rains? Does it flood? Does it stay wet for a really long time? And then how much sun does it get? Does it get early morning sun for a couple hours, then it gets shade for the rest of the day, or is it in shade all the time? These are kind of things to consider as you're kind of choosing your plant palette. Number 2 here is be aware of plant size. With native plants, it's good to know that Oklahoma, we're a plains state, and so the Great Plains is a really, really big ecosystem. It goes all the way from the southern tip of Texas all the way up to the middle of Canada. It's a really, really big ecosystem. And because of that, the plants that have evolved to live here tend to be really good at spreading. So just bear that in mind, as you're picking native plants, how big is the area you're planting in? Are the plants you're planting is one of them going to completely dominate the others and take over? Just kind of consider that as you're working with native plants. And that kind of grabs the third tip there too. I kind of rolled those into one. And then the last one is try and fail. I think if you don't know already, a lot of green thumbs, people call them green thumbs, but they've killed as many plants as they've saved. I know that's certainly true for my part. Sometimes you got to kill plants. You got to experiment. Always experiment. See what works. Sometimes it won't work out, and other times you might have a great success. But then you got next year. For the failures, you got next year to try again. That's the beauty of it.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. I probably went way too long.
No, you were good.
Okay.
So what kind of support can like the Yard by Yard or the Conservation Commission or conservation districts can they provide to either individuals or like a congregation or somebody who's wanting to switch over some of their maybe Bermuda grass or fescue or whatever they have to something that's a little more along these lines?
Yeah, definitely. So let me talk real quick about that. Then I'll go through the yard by yard program real quick and talk about kind of what that is and what the goal of that is. So the Conservation Commission, we're stationed out in every county of Oklahoma, has what's called a conservation district. And these conservation districts, they are resource hubs for landowners. So you can reach out to your local conservation districts. I'm here in Oklahoma City, so that's Oklahoma County. So the office that I'm currently in is the Oklahoma County Conservation District. Kind of fill in the blank. If you live out in way out east in Leflore County, it's the Leflore County Conservation District. You can find their contact info and reach out to them, and they're a resource hub for you. In a lot of ways, we operate like health departments, but for land managers. We have different programs that might come through our office that can provide financial assistance, which is great. But we're always providing technical assistance. So if you live in Oklahoma County, you could call our office. You might get a hold of me or somebody like me, and you can ask them anything. Let's say you want to get rid of Bermuda lawn and install a pollinator habitat. You can be like, hey, I want to get rid of my Bermuda lawn. How do I do that? And I can give you some options on how to best remove Bermuda lawn. I can give you some plant recommendations for what might grow in the area that you're working with. I can help facilitate a soil test for you to give you a better idea of the existing conditions. And most of the time, some people I can handle over the phone or through an email, but most of the time I'm scheduling a time with you to come out there and look at it with you. And sometimes it's kind of a one-off. We have one phone call conversation. I never hear from that person again. And other times we build a relationship and we're in constant conversation. And either way is fine for me. I like talking to people as they're working through their projects, and seeing those projects progress. And if I can answer questions or be of help throughout any of that, I'm always game. I'm a plant person. If you can't tell, I like talking about plants. I like talking about ecology. So I will talk myself blue in the face. And I love to learn. I go out and on these consults and I think we trade knowledge. I give that person some knowledge and they give me some knowledge, and then I take that knowledge with me to the next person. So it's always conversational. It's always a really enjoyable experience for me. But anyway, the yard by yard program. This is like a eco-friendly landscaping certification program, and so basically how it works is if you were to open up the application to the yard by yard program, you would find that it's split up into 4 categories: soil health, water conservation, food production, and wildlife habitat. And then underneath those 4 categories, let's go to this page real quick. Underneath those 4 categories, there's a list of practices. So soil health, like using organic mulch, having a vegetable garden, planting native plants for wildlife habitat. And you basically put a check in the application next to one of those practices. In order to qualify, you have to be able to check at least one box in 3 different categories, and you have to be able to check 5 boxes total. And then you would submit that application. Eventually, it would make its way to me. I would reach out to you, or somebody who maybe is a little closer to you might reach out to you, depending on where you're at in the state. And they would just be like, hey, I want to schedule a time with you to kind of complete your certification and bring you those certification materials. And what you get out of the deal is you get a sign, you get some wildflower seeds. You get kind of signed up to get pinged by some of our educational resources as they're made available. And I say this very, very tentatively, but financial resources as they're made available, you just get pinged to let you know that those things are happening. We don't always have financial resources, but when we do, we try to let the yard by yard members know about that. And yeah, and then I always like putting lots of pictures up. Every yard is different. So this right here, this is my friend Ron, and Ron, he is really mainly focused on vegetable gardening, and he lets his yard run a little bit wild. He kind of rides the line between chaos and garden. But you don't got to be like Ron if you don't want to. This is another friend of mine, Yvonne, and she's a master gardener. I mean, her gardens are pristine, and she also kind of mixes ornamentals and native plants. So even in this picture, we can see this right here. This is like a hydrangea or something, and then we got some purple coneflower, which is a native. We got some goldenrod, which is a native. So she kind of has a mixture of ornamentals and natives, just in her landscaping beds. And then this yard, it was pretty much your typical lawn, except they had raised beds with native plants and vegetables in it. So there's a broad spectrum of what qualifies for the program. And here's just some more pictures of some different yards. This is a deciduous holly, which is just a kind of a cool tree. And then I put this up. This is a hedgerow of Yaupon hollies that's native here in Oklahoma. So you can still have a very classic landscaping look, but be using all natives, like Yaupon hollies, for example. And this is another garden that's kind of a mixture of native plants and non-natives. So we see cannas, right? That's not a native. It's a very beautiful, but it's not a native. But then we see, down here, some, this is black-eyed Susan. Got some lance leaf coreopsis over here. Oh, wait, no, that's probably plains coreopsis. But anyway, then some Indian grass. But anyway, you just see a mixture of ornamentals and natives. So, I love it when somebody wants to convert their whole lawn, but maybe that's not you. Maybe that's not your style. That's okay. Just do what you can with the resources you have. And just, I don't know, set a goal to plant 1 or 2 natives, and you maybe even still might be able to, even just doing small things here and there, you can qualify for the yard by yard program. Here's some more pictures. So this guy here, he had a clover lawn, which was pretty cool. This is like a bee habitat that somebody made. And then this is another attractive native shrub, American beautyberry. Okay, so yeah, here's just another overview of what you get. You get a yard sign. That's our yard sign there, right? So you get that. That's part of the package. You get some native seeds, and you get alerts on education opportunities and different resource opportunities. So how do you apply? You can go to our website, okconservation.org/yard by yard. You can find us pretty easily on Google. If you Google yard by yard, you'll find that website without too much trouble. You can message us on Facebook, or you can email us at yardbyyardproject@gmail.com. Okay, and then real quick, I want to talk about Grounds by Grounds. Grounds by Grounds it's a sister program to the Yard by Yard program, whereas the Yard by Yard program is more focused on individual homeowners. Grounds by Grounds is focused on public spaces. So you get some different sign options, school, church, business, park, or mini grounds, which we'll talk about to kind of better represent maybe the community that you're a part of. So what's different? It's the same program as a very similar application process, but it's just a different target audience with some different sign options. Also, to qualify for the Grounds by Grounds program, you kind of need to have an educational component. So this could be as simple as a sign out there that describes what you do. It could be classes you teach with kids or with families or anything like that. Just an educational component is one of the requirements. We're pretty lenient on what that educational component looks like. But if you're a public space, we just want to see that space is being used for education. And then the mini grounds option, like I referenced earlier, this is it is a much more lenient application process. And basically, you get a sign that looks like this, but you could probably qualify for a mini grounds, even if you just had a couple container pots. It is much more lenient application. And it's for people who maybe don't have a ton of garden space. Maybe a lot of your space is concrete and you don't have a ton of space to even put a garden. So we wanted to have an option for people that are in that boat. And then the application process is the exact same. You just got to go to okconservation.org/grounds by grounds. And you really can't Google us. I put Google yard by yard, because if you Google grounds by grounds, you probably won't find it. Okay, then I wanted to put some tips for getting started at your church or any other religious institute. So you got to identify core members. I think it's really key for gardens and to know about gardens that they take maintenance. I'm sure Kat can back me up on that. Gardens, they take a little bit of work. But if you identify some key people that kind of feel most passionate or are willing to put in the work, that's pretty crucial. These people that can organize the work that goes along with the garden, they can organize fundraisers, and they can organize volunteer groups. So that might be like a green team or a club or a garden board or something along those lines. Next tip here is be thorough when garden prepping. This is a mistake that I see pretty frequently in gardening, is especially when you're converting Bermuda lawn to a garden bed. You really, really got to get rid of that Bermuda lawn and then set up some type of barrier to keep the Bermuda from coming back in. I mean, I can't talk about that enough, because I've made that mistake before, and you'll have to spend a lot of time digging Bermuda out if you don't get it right the first time. Involve kids. These are some tips that were actually given to me by a colleague who started a green club at her church. And she said, she was like, when we were able to engage families and kids, the garden program kind of got a lot more traction. It brought in a lot more interest. So I wanted to include her tips in here. And that was really her biggest one. She was like, find ways to get kids involved. She said they did that at her church by focusing on pollinators. They said they kind of did some vegetables, but they really were having a hard time engaging people. But then when they switched more towards wildlife and pollinator gardens, it was much easier to engage kids and engage families. And then try and fail. I put that on both, because that one is just kind of carved into my heart. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to waste a little time and try something new and fail. I'll go ahead and bypass this. That's the end of my spiel. I'm sorry if I was a little long-winded there. But anyway, here's my email. If, like I said, we're a free service. We're just like the health department. We're a completely free service. If you're in Oklahoma County or nearby, and you want to talk about gardening or land management, and you need some guidance, please feel free to reach out.
And in all the counties, the services are free, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. So I think some people do get a little overwhelmed about starting. And I've made that same mistake with Bermuda grass and try to warn people. They never listen. But that sort of like that prepping process, like I think that would be so helpful to have someone like your office to sort of help kind of guide that process. And then sort of like even like maybe some design help a little bit, like these go well together. Like you were saying, organizing by water needs, by that would be such a great resource. So thank you so much for your work and for offering that.
Oh yeah, no problem at all. And we have resources ourselves, but we also try to point people towards resources that exist that they may not know about. And there's a half a dozen different guides of how to get rid of Bermuda. I'm happy to talk you through it. I'm happy to share those guides with you if that's really all you need. We're easy. We're here to help and definitely try to be easy to work with.
Yeah, and I think I love your point too about the just starting a little bit at a time. I think that's kind of how, when I made some of those changes, and if like, let's say a faith community has a pretty sizable property, a lot of land that you're talking about, that can seem really overwhelming, but just starting small with just a little bit at a time. I think like every year mine got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. I did a little bit more space, made one more bed or whatever. So I really like that focus too.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think I'm probably the most guilty in the world about just my eyes are bigger than my stomach. And but yeah, just bear in mind. Yeah, I think that's a great tip for gardening. Is do a little bit every year and chip away at it, and just a little bit more every day. That's my motto when I'm out there working in my garden. It's just a little more every day. And then the coolest yards that I get to visit in Yard by Yard, it's like it's the people who have been working on it for 20 years, in the same house or something like that.
Yeah. And I think, when you're looking at like a congregation, for example, you're probably going to have a lot of different opinions about how your building or property should look. And there's also, I think, room for compromise. I liked that you, in one of your slides, you had something about a compromise. Like, how can we, maybe that you do have some area that's mowed, Bermuda or fescue or whatever. And then, but you also have a bed that's sort of like in the middle of that, or the two can kind of go together, and every little bit counts, which is another great piece of the yard by yard concept.
Yeah, 100%. And something I didn't bring up that I should have is Yard by Yard. It's an encouragement program. It's meant to encourage people and help them kind of keep building on things they're already doing. So it's mainly yeses, right? It's like, yes, I do this, and or yes, I plant native plants. Yes, I use compost. There's only one no, and that is your yard has to be pesticide free. And the reason for that is we don't want to encourage people to plant native plants that would attract wildlife, and then for those native plants to be compromised by pesticides. That kind of crosses an ethical boundary. So no pesticides is allowed. But all that to say that if you do want Bermuda lawn or fescue lawn, I go out on calls all the time of people wanting to talk about how do I manage my Bermuda lawn organically. And there are options. It's different. I always tell those people, how bad do you want your Bermuda lawn to be just Bermuda? Because you may see some more weeds than you have in the past if you're switching from kind of conventional lawn care, which has a lot of pesticides, to organic lawn care. But you can have just as healthy of a lawn. And before this, in my past career, I was in parks management. I was a project manager at Scissortail Park, and I managed the lawns at Scissortail Park. And we certainly didn't do it organically. But all that to say is I do have that background of knowing what it looks like to take care of Bermuda lawns. And I'm always down to talk about how do you do that without inorganic chemical input.
Gotcha. So if they did, so that I hadn't thought about that. That is a struggle. Like when you do see, because sometimes it's like, well, they did a nice little job here where there was maybe some mowed grass area, but then they had a bed. But you're right that if I haven't ever really maintained a Bermuda lawn. So I actually, before I converted mine or whatever, it just died, because obviously I wasn't feeding it, as you said. So I hadn't thought about that, but then that is at odds. Like if you are introducing pesticides to maintain that lawn, it will impact okay. So that's a great point. Thank you for saying that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no problem. And really the key to lawn care is it's consistent maintenance. That's really, really the key. That goes a lot further than any pesticide.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot. This was really great. And I have some of those plants that you suggested in my yard, but
Nice.
But not all of them. So where are some places, like if like a congregation kind of at that level wanted to start getting some of those, do you have some recommendations?
Yeah. So for Oklahoma County, I can't speak for the other counties, but in Oklahoma County, we kind of compiled a list of all the native plant nurseries kind of in and around Oklahoma City, and also landscapers who are familiar with working with native plants or familiar with maintaining native plant landscapes.
Okay. Yeah. Another maybe way they could reach out to the conservation district that might have info on whatever might be available in that specific location.
For sure. Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This was really great. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed it. And thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much.